So let's delve more deeply into Socrates' response. And, a lot of it turns on this idea that justice is a craft. And Socrates doesn't really explain what he has in mind with this, and it might just seem like some verbal hair splitting, but I do think there's a lot to this, and I think it gives him a pretty powerful response to Thrasymachus. So let's say a little bit more about it. Well, one thing that Thrasymachus seems to assume is that justice, or indeed, ordering a society at all, is zero sum. Now, zero sum is a bit of jargon. It's not a term that Socrates or Thrasymachus would have used. Modern economic jargon and game theory, talks a lot about zero sum. But I do think it gets at what Thrasymachus has in mind. And what he seems to have in mind is that there's a limited amount of good things in society. That amount of good things is always going to stay the same. And so for one group to benefit or to do well, it always has to come at the expense of another. If the powerful, the strong, the people in charge want to do well for themselves, they're going to have to take away from other people through some means. And he thinks that's what they do by conning people with this idea of justice. But as Thrasymachus admits, justice is a craft, or he thinks it is, right? Socrates presses him on this, and he says, yeah, justice is a craft. But Socrates says crafts aren't like that. He doesn't use this language, but they're not zero sum, right? Games are zero sum, poker. For me to win money, I wouldn't win money, I'm terrible at it. But for me to win money, you would have to lose money if we were playing, right? Or more likely, for you to win money, I would have to lose money, right? For me to win a game of chess, my opponent has to lose. But Socrates will say crafts aren't like that. It's not like there's some limited pie or group of good things. Pie is the term people use a lot. We'll use that too. It's not like that there's some limited pie, and that the only way anyone can do better is to take a bigger slice for themselves and leave a smaller slice for someone else. In fact, crafts are such that if someone does them well, they actually increase the amount of good things. And Socrates has some examples, but, think about a craftsman that you hire to do some work on your house or your apartment, right? Or that somebody does. Slightly gross example, but if your pipes are backed up, the toilet's backed up, and you call a plumber and he clears the pipes, well, you're better off than you were before, right? You no longer have this problem. If you're sick and you go see a doctor and she does a good job and she cures you, or at least gives you an effective treatment, you are better off than you were before. You go to a bakery, you really like cookies, and you get some cookies that you don't have to make and are better than the ones you could make, or some cupcakes. Again, you are better off than you were before. And Socrates will say this is the nature of crafts, right? A competent craftsman increases the amount of good things, be it cupcakes or health or just normally functioning toilets, right? Which again, kind of gross, but it is a good thing, right? He wouldn't to use these examples necessarily. Cupcakes and toilets didn't exist in his time, but the point stands, right? The craftsman, if he's good at what he does or she does, increases the amount of good things. If you hire a craftsman, be it a cook or a plumber or a carpenter or a doctor, they will increase the amount of good things. And Socrates says, because a smart craftsman increases the amount of good things, they can benefit without that benefit coming at the other person's cost. I mean, look, if you hire a craftsman, you're going to have to pay them, right? You have to pay your doctor. You have to pay your plumber. You have to pay for your cupcakes. But obviously, you think you're better off or you wouldn't pay, right? Both parties can benefit. This is how capitalism's supposed to work. Socrates doesn't say this, but you can put this in there. This person creates something, they increase the amount of good things. They share it with you because you give them money. Well, you're better off than you were before because you've bought it. They're better off than before. The whole idea of craftsmen being good at what they do, they increase the amount of good things. Both the craftsman and the person they work for can benefit because this is what craftsmen do. Well, okay. I'm really hammering that in the ground. Why am I making such a big deal of it? Well, Socrates will say, if justice is really a craft, it follows that the person who is good at justice increases the amount of good things. And if the person who is good at justice, the good leader or leaders, can increase the amount of good things, then he can benefit without it coming at the expense of others in his society. Socrates will say a truly just leader, I hate to use this metaphor, but whatever, it's the one people use. Not Socrates, but you hear this in our society. It's not like he has to take more of the pie to do well. He can make the pie bigger. Everybody can get a bigger slice, him included, without this coming at the expense of anybody else. Now, you might just think, okay, Socrates is being clever with definitions, just a lot of wordplay. Thrasymachus accuses him of this a lot, but there is something to what Socrates is saying. Think about what the world would be like if there were no justice. If there were no laws, not only no laws, but no one tried to even be moral. Would that be a good world? Would you want to live in that society? No, right? A society where there's no justice, no morality would be a terrible life for everybody. You would have to constantly worry about someone murdering you just because they were mad at you, taking your stuff just because they wanted to. Societies with justice, with morality, with laws are going to be better for everyone in them than would a society with none of that, right? My students, I've never seen these movies and I don't think I ever will. When I bring up this possibility, they always mention The Purge. I haven't seen the movie. But again, this is not a world anybody wants to live in, right? Or to go back to an example I've been using, look at the end of the Jim Crow system in the South, segregation. Gavin Wright writes about this in Sharing the Prize. As I said, because you had this unjust system, everybody was worse off. The region was economically backwards. People were poorer. Well, as Gavin Wright shows in this book, Sharing the Prize, once civil rights laws were put in place, the South economically started to do way better. It started to catch up with the rest of the country. Some states in the South, Virginia, Texas, and I think Georgia, are actually richer than the national average now. Even the ones that aren't have caught up a lot. And this catching up really did just, Wright shows this, take off with, passing civil rights laws. Everybody can do well. Nobody's benefit has to come at the expense of someone else. A good system of justice and morality can benefit everybody. Or think about the life of a tyrant, right? And this kind of goes back to the point Socrates was making before. Think about a tyrant, like Bashar al-Assad in Syria, or, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the USSR for many years. You know, do you think it's good to be a tyrant? Thrasymachus says, yeah, of course, but think about it. Would you really want to be this person? I don't think so, right? If you were a tyrant, if you were Joseph Stalin, if you are one of the many emperors of the Roman Empire, pretty much everybody wants you dead, right? And they want you dead because they rightly think it's in their interest. They're afraid of you. Or, they think you're going to kill them. They think you're going to take their stuff. And you can look, Stalin spent his entire life in very justified paranoia. He thought the people under him were going to murder him. And there's actually decent evidence that one of them probably did. One of his underlings, this guy Beria, there's a good evidence that he actually, it's not clear, it's not 100%, but there's more than a few reports that say that he said that he fed Stalin rat poison. And the way Stalin died, he had what looked like a stroke, very consistent with someone being poisoned with warfarin with rat poison, right? Anyway, whether or not Stalin was poisoned with rat poison, after he was incapacitated, basically his underlings let him sit around for a day and kept doctors away. While he slowly died, they said Comrade Stalin is resting because they were all afraid of him and they knew they'd be better off with him dead. Beria was the guy who took over after Stalin. He was very much a tyrant. He was in charge for maybe a year and a half. And his underlings basically, they had a trial to make it look good, but they basically drug him into an alley and shot him, right? The guy after him, Khrushchev, fared a little better. They didn't kill him, but they did basically shuttle him off to his retirement house where he was not allowed to see anybody except his family. They asked his grandson at one point, how's Khrushchev doing? And his response was, Grandpa cries a lot. Right? Being a tyrant, because you have to be constantly afraid for your life, is not a good thing. And there's a pretty good chance you're going to get killed, right? I think something like half of the Roman emperors were murdered. And that's a conservative estimate because a lot of people suspect that even a lot of the ones that weren't obviously murdered were poisoned, right? Well, Socrates would say, if you are a good ruler, if you are good at justice, if you are truly moral, then a good case could be made you would have a better life, because if your rule really is in the benefit of everybody, well, then people aren't going to have a good reason to want you dead, right? So he would say, you, Thrasymachus, think that the life of the tyrant is good, but when you think through it, it's not. What's more, you have this idea of justice that one person's benefit always has to come at the expense of other people, but that's not really so. Think about what it would be like if there were no justice, and look at societies, good systems of justice, people who are really good, just, moral rulers can make things go better for everybody. Now, we'll come back to this, I don't have time to make you guys read everything I might want to. In the other sections of the Republic, Thrasymachus gives up, but these guys, Glaucon, and his brother, whose name I forget, Adeimantus, I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They kind of step up another challenge to morality to Socrates. We don't have time to really talk about it. We will come back to something in this vein when we talk about Aristotle and his moral theories. But, for the time being, I do think, it's interesting to look at this challenge to morality and to see why, it doesn't quite work, why Socrates does have something in the way of an answer. This idea that people are not always clear about what their self-interest is, and that it's hard to work out a good account of self-interest, that's something I want you guys to keep very much in mind, because it will be important when we get to Aristotle this is a point he will really push. All right, for the time being, though, we're going to wrap up Thrasymachus' challenge. I do have a few things in the next lecture I want to say. I don't think Thrasymachus quite makes a completely convincing argument that people should be as unjust as possible, to they should be tyrants, or that we should be this skeptical about morality. I do think there are some things we can learn from Thrasymachus and that we should learn.